go with that. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kai Davis, and today I'm going to be talking about my senior IS on the relationships between gender identity and neurodiversity. So to start off, I have some terms to note. First, neurodiversity refers to the variations in social communication, learning, attention, and other brain functions. This often includes psychological diagnoses such as autism and ADHD, along with other neurodevelopmental conditions. And then similarly, we have the word neurodivergent, which is used to refer to a person whose brain functions outside of the narrow box that society construes as normal. And on the opposite side, we have neurotypical, which is a person whose brain functions normally according to societal convention. There's a few more terms here. We have gender identity being used here as the way an individual identifies with a gender category. So this could be woman, man, neither, or something more complex. Gender expression or presentation is the way in which someone expresses their identity through clothing, behavior, posture, mannerisms, and so on. And then finally, sex assigned at birth is used to refer to the assignment and classification of people as male, female, intersex, or another sex based on a combination of anatomy, hormones, and chromosomes. So first I want to take a look at some of the existing research on this intersection of identity. So one of the first studies on this intersection was published in 2010 by DeVry and their colleagues. This study looked at over 200 children and adolescents who have been referred to the gender identity clinic of a medical center in Amsterdam. And all of the participants in the study received a standardized clinical assessment that consisted of diagnostic interviews with the parents about the way the child was developing and functioning, a collection of information from their schools, and then psychological testing by a trained psychologist. The study found that 7.8% of the children and adolescents in this clinic had autism spectrum disorder, which is significantly higher than the prevalence of autism spectrum disorder in the general population at that time, which was estimated to be about 0.6 to 1%. This study was limited, though, in our modern view due to its age. This was published in 2010, so it is using definitions from the DSM-4, meaning that they're not quite up to date with what our current standards are in psychology. Then the next big study on this topic was done in 2014, and this one, rather than looking at a group of gender divergent children looking for neurodivergencies, this one looked at a group of children with specific neurodevelopmental disorders, and using item 110 of the Child Behavioral Checklist, which is a form completed by parents to help detect and diagnose behavioral and developmental problems in kids and teens. They used this question, which reads, wishes to be the other sex, and use that to judge the gender variance in these children. And this study found that participants with autism were about 8 times more likely to be gender variant when compared to the control group, and participants with ADHD were roughly 7 times more likely to be gender variant than the control participants. Well, I also did a view of narratives from neurodivergent trans people and looked through them, looking for common themes and ideas that were prevalent throughout multiple stories. So one of the first things that popped up a lot was the idea of neurogenders, which are a series of gender identities which are specific to neurodivergent people whose experience of gender relates to their neurotype or who feel that they can't fully understand their gender due to their neurotype. This is an umbrella term under which many individuals have created new and specific identities to describe the way that they relate to their gender and their neurodivergency. And then we also found 3 series of themes within the narratives that consisted of the first one being fitting in, which kind of referred to fitting into society, fitting in with classmates and coworkers, roles and paths that had been laid out for them, and also the parallels between growing up in the closet and undiagnosed, and the parallels between masking, which is the idea of hiding a neurodivergency to appear normal to society, and passing, which is the idea of hiding or blending in as cisgender when you are not. Our next theme was the feeling of being detached, so feeling as if they were detached from their gender identity or from the concept of gender as a whole. And then social roles, many trans autistic individuals described a realization that they were performing gender in a way that helped them to fulfill the social roles they had been placed in. And they also saw social roles coming up in the descriptions of fitting in a lot. Looking at some of the theoretical perspectives I used, intersectionality was originally coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989 to describe the specific oppression faced by Black women who are affected by both racism and sexism simultaneously. But this framework has been adapted and used to describe intersections of oppression in many different facets in the years since. I used the framework of intersectionality to support my examination of the effects of neurodivergency and the neurodivergency and non-cisgender gender identity on a person. And this also led to neuroqueering, which is a term that was originally developed by Dr. Nick Walker and was originally conceived of as a verb used to describe the process of queering both neuronormativity and heteronormativity simultaneously. It's derived from the use of queer as a verb within queer theory to describe the process of subverting, defying, and liberating oneself from cis and heteronormativity. Moving on to look at what my study was consisting of. It consisted of 3 sections, a measurement of neurodiversity, descriptions of gender, and then general demographics. My participants ended up being 92 individuals between the ages of 18 and 52. 58.7% of my participants self-identified as neurodivergent, and then I grouped my participants into cisgender and transgender, and it was roughly half and half. And I found that participants who self-identified as neurotypical tended to identify as cisgender more than transgender, and then vice versa. So individuals who identified themselves as neurodivergent were more likely to identify as being transgender. So I had developed a scoring method based off of several neurodiagnostic forms that help to kind of quantify neurodivergency, and we found that there was a significant relationship between self-identified gender and the neurodivergency score. I also ran a series of qualitative questions asking individuals to identify their gender based off of a series of questions surrounding the 5 senses. Coming out of this, we found that across all of the neurodivergency groups, that gender was most commonly described as smelling like vanilla, tasting like strawberries, feeling smooth and soft. And then we also had clothing for a visual and music for an audio, which were both significantly more varied in their descriptions, with the music consisting of almost entirely different songs with only one song that was repeated. So to wrap up, my study was the first to examine this relationship within adults rather than children, and also the first to search for both neurodiversity and gender divergency within a sample of the general population rather than searching for one of those traits within the other group. The study was limited due to my sample size, the fact that I quantified neurodivergency, and several other things. And hopefully in the future, I hope that this research can be used to broaden horizons for acceptance and help to create a place in the world that is more accepting of individuals at this intersection.
sample of the overall population, so I'm really curious about where the sample came from.
Yeah, so I recruited primarily through two different methods. One using SONA, which is the college's program that gives introduction to psychology students class credit in exchange for filling out or for participating in research going on at the college. And then I also distributed through word of mouth and social media to collect a broader sample than just the college lister.
I know we shouldn't read into something that happened only twice, but what was the repeated song?
It was actually Born This Way by Lady Gaga. And if people are interested, I had actually compiled a Spotify playlist of all of the answers. If you would like to email me, I can share that.
I wonder if you could share a little bit more about the like gender ascent and extra-mixing and those answers that people across the board gave, or were there differences between your trans and cis participants? If you could say a little more about that.
So yeah, those answers were surprisingly consistent across the board, at least in those top answers. There was a bit more variance looking at like everything under the first answer, but across all the categories, that top answer was consistent, and I thought that was really surprising.
Was the question like I think of gender as a concept? What is
the questions
or
are
is it
specifically
my gender?
Yeah, they were worded as if your gender was a candle, what would it smell like?
Okay.
Or if your gender was a food, what would it taste like?
I just think it's awesome that your study led to a Spotify playlist. You said we could contact you and we would be able to get access to that playlist?
Yeah.
That is awesome. Thank you. You will be hearing from me.